program is wrong. My grandsons, all 5 of them are aged 17 down to 8. We have number 2, Jake, here today, a birder. Do we have any other guests or visiting Rotarians?
Visiting Rotarian.
Bart Cleary, Rotary Club of Oxford.
I'm going to start the baskets. I think I'm supposed to tell a brief story, so I'm going to tell you about an agonizing experience I went through at the Boeing Training Center many years ago. Very luxurious, great food. We refer to it as Club Fed or the Velvet Prison. They pick you up at the airport, no cars, no escape, and you go from 4 in the morning in the gym till sometimes 2 in the morning when your team stops planning strategy. But early on, one of the things they put us through, and you really have to appreciate, you have to be there because they have professional actors, and so they're very good at engaging whatever they're trying to do. And we played this game called Galaxy of the Stars. It's competitive, and each year in the Galaxy lasts 3 minutes. You have 1 minute to read the problem on the planet you're about to land on, 1 minute for someone on your team to go get hints and strategy from one of the 2 professional actors who's a trainer, and then 1 minute to execute your plan, and then it's next year. And it doesn't sound that bad, but there are flashing lights and loud horns, and they manage to make you feel pressured. And they're very insightful too, so if you're awkward enough and you get set up to collect the hint that they're going to give you, if they see you're like me, to make you do the chicken dance. I'm not going to repeat that, it was too stressful. And you go through it, and we're getting slaughtered. I mean, we're losing team members every year. They warned us that would happen, and then because they're a little duplicitous, they told us that normally when you got killed, you were out of the game. But this time, just this time, to try something a little different, we're going to let you go to another table and join another team of 6 people. And so it goes on, and it's terrible. We're getting slaughtered, and gradually it begins to get a little better. And at the end, it's going pretty smoothly. And then the instructors disappear. And what happened was so obvious that we figured it out at every table. That's because we just had the Myers-Briggs testing that I think we heard about here a month or 2 ago. And when we started out at my table, everyone was talking. No one was listening. So we got killed. At some of the other tables, everyone was sitting around waiting for someone else to say something. They got killed. Get the diversity in the team, things go better. That's my story. Crisis is resolved. I'm going to do my best to get down because, as I said, today's speaker is very interesting. I'm going to offer a blessing. Let us pray. Lord of the universe. Pardon me, I went too fast. I do that. I should have warned you. I'm a stroke survivor. I'm getting around okay. But the big thing with my stroke is the morning after having been a person who had been reading a bit more than a book a week for 10 years of retirement, I couldn't read a word. Life goes on. I'm still married to the same woman. I've still got the same son. Could be worse. But I've gotten to where I read, but not as fast as you. So let's see how this goes. Let us pray. Lord of the universe, one of your wise missionaries said recently, you can judge a person by the checkbook stubs. As Rotarians, we are generally blessed with lives of relatively luxury and opportunities unknown to many. Help us to review our checkbooks and indeed the regions of our lives with honesty, as well as our prosperity and our opportunity to help others. Open our hearts and our accounts to those in need, while still providing for us with appropriate fruits of our own labors. Help us to share not only our tangible wealth, but also the things we have learned, the riches of knowledge, leadership, and creativity with more of our city, our nation, and our world. Help us make it a better place, filled with a peace and love that can come only from God, hopefully through us. Amen.
Hey, Jim, for those of you who haven't got any bucks yet to come help people at Family House, if you come, you'll find out he is a gourmet chef. I mean, first class gourmet chef.
It's my wife's fault. Many years ago, we formed a wine tasting group, trying to figure out what the sommelier was doing to terrorize me. And gradually food started creeping in, and the women went nuts over the two guys who were cooking, and I had to get in that game.
Thanks, Jim. We appreciate that. Lorenzo, you here?
Yes.
Lorenzo, come up and tell us the good news, bro. He's got a big announcement for us. Some of us already heard, but the rest of you should.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, thank you for the opportunity just to share. There will be something a little more formal, maybe next week or the following week, but we now have an Interact Club, which is high school Rotary, and there are two co-founders. One is Ava Gilbert, who's Eric Gilbert's, our club member's Eric's daughter. And another one is Louis Lassiter, who went to RILA last year through our club. So we're very excited. You know, this is something that a lot of clubs have. We've been lacking it. It's a great way to get another footprint into part of the community that we don't have a great presence in. And I think it's also a great way to recruit new members because, at least from my experience, I always did whatever my kids were interested in. And anyway, there'll be more on this in the next few weeks and months. Thank you.
Great job. Also, I want to remind everyone we have the teacher supply store coming up August 21st. If you haven't signed up, you new members, this is something you really need to take part in. It's one of our biggest things. It's awesome. It really gets you in the spirit of Rotary. And in that way, I'm going to segue now to Mr. Badur. Come up here, Dick Badur, with a very special presentation today.
I'm good at it, man. I do have a presentation. I have an official business, but I got something to say.
That's right.
I can't let what happened last week just go by. And it really started a year ago with past President Omar or ex-president or whatever you want to call him. I mean, there's a reason we have a 1-year limit, you know. That's
thank God.
But I could handle that all right. And then last week, and I don't want to call out anybody's name here, a respected new member whose initials are LM said something about the table that I was sitting at. You know, and he tried to kind of give a backhanded comment, but he called us a name. And I just can't let it go by. So I'm going to say right now, I am not now, nor have I ever been a member of the curmudgeon party. Now, while it's true that I've hung out with some people who might resemble that remark, but they are not card-carrying members of the curmudgeon party, nor am I. And I want to kind of issue a warning. I don't know if it's right to say this is a warning, or I don't mean it to be a threat or anything like that. But it's like my 5th grade teacher, Nunn, said to me, a word to the wise is sufficient. So here's to the word to the wise. These guys are tough. They're strong. And they remind me of these World War II USA submarines. They run silent and they run deep. I have no idea what that means. I've always wanted to use it in a speech, and I got it in.
You can only give this here now.
Jim, it is your day. Jim has come into this club. I can't get around there. You've heard the term in baseball, hit for the cycle, where you go single, double, triple, home run. Well, he's hit a grand slam. He just came into the club in January and has gotten involved in Family House, has gotten involved in Teacher Supply Store. He was almost immediately a Paul Harris Fellow and then a Phil Lomiger Fellow. And a couple of weeks ago, he gave us a check for $10,000 to put him in the Legacy Society. So join me in thanking Jim and his family. You can sit at our table anytime.
Coach, thank you all for being here. This is a great group. It's been a real privilege and one of the joys of my life to be part of this. Thank you.
Well, Jim, not so fast, Jim. You're not done yet. We're going to let you introduce today's speaker because I think you might have an insight on just what he's about. So please come up. It's your day, Jim.
Mike, that's right. We never got the time basket over there.
Oh, I can get that back there. Don't worry.
Okay, I am going to be very brief with this. You've got the description of our son here. He's doing some amazing things. My wife and I have been each to Turkey about 12 or 13 times, mostly together, sometimes alone. And I really can't compete with him as a speaker, so I'm going to let him tell you about what he's doing. And it's been a real joy to watch, and he's doing miraculous things. So, Armando, please come on up here. And I guess I'm so excited I didn't even say, this is my son, Armando Robles. One thing I should say is when I express amazement about how he turned out a lot, and that I'm his father, and then that charming woman way at the back there whacks me upside the head and reminds me that I'm not the only parent. So,
thank you, Dad. It's a blessing for me to be with you all. I will confess, I have never spoken to a group like this. As the years have gone by, I'm increasingly asked to speak, to teach for different groups, but it's almost always people who have been exposed to the service ministries that have grown up in our context and the neat things that are happening, and they want to learn. And so they have specific questions, and they already know who we are. And so because of that, I know who they are. And except for a couple people back at that table, I don't know any of you. And you don't have much of a sense about what we do. And in general, whenever I'm talking to a group, I have one agenda item almost all the time, which is simply I want to be as helpful as I can be. Things that we've learned, and how it shaped how we do what we do, wherever they're transferable to be helpful to others. And so, unless you guys redirect me, that's my goal here, but I'm aware that you're sitting in a very different context. And so what we're going to focus on today is talking significantly about how do you serve well when you're serving with the poor and the oppressed. And I'll start just with a short thing from my past about what started to push me in that direction in the first place. I was in university, and it was towards the end of that time, and for the first time, I sat down face to face with someone who was really in deep poverty, where their needs were overwhelming, and where they were far beyond any capacity that I had to meet. And as I sat there having that conversation, I felt genuine care and concern. I wanted to be helpful. I tried to say helpful things, and I felt like every word that came out of my mouth was a cliche. Not necessarily false, but irrelevant. And even in the moment of that conversation, that was deeply troubling to me. That I could be face to face with another human being that I believed was made in the image of God, that God could have good plans for their life, and that I could feel that anything I would have to say, discuss, talk about, help would be irrelevant. And so that began to open up my eyes to the fact that there were some really significant gaps in my understanding of what it means to be poor or oppressed, and what it means to engage with the poor well. And that began to push me in a direction of diving into those realms. And well, I'm getting old, so it's been going on for about 25 years. About 16, 17 years ago, my wife and I moved to the Middle East to begin some new ministries among refugees. And things have grown a lot. So now, I think it says on your sheet maybe, we have a few dozen people who are working with us. Most of what I do now is in the realm of mentorship, teaching, supervising, helping younger, newer people learn how to engage well. And at the heart of what makes it particularly challenging is that as Westerners, the vast majority of us have an incredibly narrow understanding of what poverty is. And our understanding of poverty is so narrow that functionally, for most of us, it's false. Meaning once you take our understanding and you apply it to a poor person, because there is so much we tend to not see, often what we do ends up being destructive. So over the years, we've had, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 people come working full-time with us. At any given point in time, we probably have an additional 60 volunteers. And without exception that I can remember in our history, the first time we've had anybody come and put them in the home of a refugee and have them hear their story and their struggles and their needs, and the response of that good-hearted, well-intentioned person who has come to serve and to help will be kind and compassionate and warm-hearted and foolish and destructive and totally counterproductive to actually helping that person in a way that would have a lasting impact on changing their life trajectory. We, almost all Westerners, come in with enormous blind spots that make it incredibly difficult to serve the poor well. And so, in part, and I'll say this, I have no memory in my life of the last time someone succeeded in offending me when I was talking. So you guys can cut me off at any point. If you want to redirect with some questions, want me to clarify something, please be bold in interrupting. But until then, I'm going to start out by just throwing a few different ideas and concepts at you. The most simplistic level of what's hard in working with the poor, or you could say the most simplistic level of where our gaps as Westerners tend to be, is that we often naturally think of poverty as a lack of stuff. So if you're not well educated, you need more school stuff. If you're poor, if you're homeless, you need more house stuff. If you're sick, you need more doctor stuff. But in some way or another, we tend to think primarily of poverty as a lack of stuff. But you'll be hard pressed to find a poor person who would describe that as their primary aspect of what makes them poor. And there is so much else that goes into it. I'll just throw a couple things. I just jotted some notes down real quick, but here's some things we see all the time. Sense of dignity and self-worth, the ability to make decisions and do things to change your circumstances, relational connections, community network, access to justice, legal protection, the ability to have a voice, hope for the future, both subjectively, like do you feel you have any hope, and objectively, do you actually have any hope? No matter what you do, could things get better? So let me tell one story that maybe will illustrate some of those things. Arzu, young Afghan woman living with her parents and brother. We work with people from all over Central Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. We're in a kind of hot spot on the refugee highway. She was the only one in her family who was working. And every time she would get home and had a paycheck or cash, she had to hand it over to her parents as soon as she got it. They would dole out to her a small allowance to spend that month, often so minimal that she could only eat 1 or 2 meals a day. Her parents and brother didn't like her very much. One day when her brother thought she was being insufficiently respectful, he poured a boiling pot of hot water on her back while she slept. She wasn't allowed out of the house except to go to work and had to come home immediately afterwards. Then they started locking her in her room, took her cell phone from her so that she couldn't have contact with anyone on the outside. She began to become increasingly fearful for her life. And on the one hand, you hear that, and well, that's a clear case of domestic violence and abuse. And that feels like the problem that needs to be addressed. But there are all kinds of other layers of poverty and oppression that play really shaping roles in her situation there. She needs all kinds of structural support that most of us in this room, coming from more privileged backgrounds, we simply take for granted. So for example, the authorities would not help her at all. That would be laughable to think that she could get any support from the police. She had no possibility of any legal help or protection. And that means that she is going to need some kinds of structural support that the authorities aren't providing. If she leaves her home, her entire community will condemn her and ostracize her. You may think it's profoundly unfair, but she will be blamed and she will be shamed, which means she will have no community anymore. And that's a problem. She needs community. There's a decent chance her brother will try to track her down and kill her. As is the case for many Afghan women, she has been trained her entire life that she has no voice, no ability to make choices, no right to make choices. And at that point, she has 2 decades of experience that it's true. She is never allowed to make a choice. She does what she's told. If any decision is happening that matters at all, it is not hers to make. And so you think of the kind of courage and proactivity you need to get out of a situation like that. And how do you do that if you don't even believe that you are able to make a choice? And so there's all kinds of initial building up that needs to happen to get someone to a place where they could get out of a situation like that. Well, in her case, she is now out of that situation. She's safe. She's in a healthy community. She's growing. She actually just got married within the last year. It was a joy to be at her wedding. But there's not just a magic wand that you can wave, encouraging someone to make the tough choice or giving some advice about what should be done. It took months of walking alongside her, teaching, encouraging, empowering her in the step-by-step realms that were necessary to get her to a place where she could really face the fullness of her reality, and then walking with her sufficiently to provide the levels of support necessary to get her out. So if someone is drowning under the weight of all kinds of different aspects of poverty and depression, and you only see 1 or 2 of them, then if you're very lucky when you try to help, your help will simply be insufficient. but much more of the time it will actually be destructive. You'll fail to help them, and in my experience, for the helpers, if they stick around long enough to see the failure, they will probably blame the poor person. And it will be the fault of the one who was trying to help.
Armando, could you fill in a little more details? It's such a fascinating story, but how were you able to get her out of the situation and save her, basically?
So it is a very long story. From when we knew Arzu to when she was out was at least a year and a half. So the initial steps were bound up with sense of self. And in the way that I process through things, if I believe that we're made in the image of God, and that because of that, humans have not just dignity, but that's all kinds of things that become intrinsic to that if it's the case. And those things get deeply damaged. And so before somebody can, maybe you could say in a similar kind of way, if you have a friend who has a goal, they want to climb Mount Everest, and they're 200 pounds overweight, and they have a bad knee, and they struggle to walk more than a half mile without needing a rest, they don't have a chance to climb Everest, right? And so their first problem is not that they can't afford the plane ticket. And so it's seeking to understand what are some of those internal things with her, and then getting to a place where another critical factor is that often when people come in to try to help, we have wonderful plans. I remember a conversation not too long ago with a guy named Aaron, and a lot of what I do now is mentorship, because this stuff's hard. And so he was engaging these 4 boys who had been trained in Al-Qaeda camps, and the boys wanted out. It's not an easy organization to just get out of. And so he was wrestling through how to help them. And he came and he had a 2-page, single-space typed, this beautiful plan of how to get them out. And I read it, and I know him. And so I said, Aaron, whose plan is this? And he said, yeah, I sat down and I worked it out. I said, have you even talked with them about this? And he said, no, I was going to share it with them. That's not their plan. Especially when it comes to doing hard things, it has to come from the person. They have to want it, see it themselves. They have to have the vision and the understanding. And there's just a long process of how does someone get to that place where they can see what the next steps are, and they're their steps and they own them. And then walking alongside them sufficiently that they're able to succeed. Because that's not enough, right? If someone's genuinely poor and oppressed, they need help. But it has to be in a process that they internally are sufficient to walk forward in and that they own. I'll share another couple kinds of stories to try to bring out some different core principles. Let me do that now, because this one can be helpful for thinking through some other kinds of principles. So one of the things that happens with some frequency is we have lots of folks that go out into homes on visits, and different people have started big programs, and so both. But a lot of people spend a lot of time in homes of refugees, walking alongside them and seeking to be helpful. And so a while ago, I got a phone call, and they said, hey, this is the situation. This family has an electric bill that just converted into USD for $1,100. And the landlord has said that he will kick them out if they don't pay it. And that's 5.5 months worth of rent. About, probably in our context, a refugee with a decent job right now is making $400 a month. A refugee with a really good job is making $600 a month. Ones with lousy job, maybe $250 or $300. So you're talking this is 3 months' wages. And they're scared of being evicted. And this person who's calling me, basically the question in their mind is, should we pay the bill? Right? They're about to get evicted, $1,100, we could pay that. Should we pay the bill? And you don't want them to be evicted. You want to help. And if you pay the bill, they can stay in their apartment, right? So that's the question the person who was calling me on the visit was asking. But in order to think through how to respond well, you got to understand the different aspects of poverty involved. And so real quickly, off the top of your mind, these ones likely come to mind. Well, on the one hand, they don't have the money to pay the electric bill. That's the most obvious one, right? That was the cause of the initial question from the person calling. They have a lack of money stuff. But there's more. They feel helpless. They believe that they are unable to act in ways that impact their situation. Similarly, they believe that their only chance for help is if they luck out with a wealthy Western person who will take pity on them. They're scared of their landlord. Their relationship with their landlord is exploitative. Those are all significant aspects of poverty. So just think through those four right now. They have a lack of stuff. They feel helpless. They feel like their only solution is a rich, in that case, white person. And they have an exploitative relationship. So you give them the money to pay their electric bill. What's happened in those four realms of poverty? Well, the bill got paid. You solved that one. What about their feeling that their conviction they have that they are incapable of doing anything to improve their situations in life? Did you work against that or reinforce it? You reinforced it. What about their conviction that their only real hope when they're in trouble is if they run into a rich Western person? Reinforce that. What about their exploitative relationship with their landlord? Reinforce that because they just caved entirely, right? Meaning you just gave them $1,100, and in the process, you drove them significantly deeper into poverty. If you had the choice, would you rather be able to change your life circumstances, believe that there's hope for you to make decisions that matter, be saved from an exploitative relationship, or pay a utility bill? Is that a hard decision? Now, these things are obviously massively more important in the realms of wealth and poverty and resource, right? That's not even a close comparison. So what actually happened? Well, I'm sure there's a lot of different ways to handle a situation like this. I'll just share with you what we actually did. I'm not intending to give the impression of this is the way to address a situation like this, but it's helpful to have concrete examples. So the first step was more questions. And so I just started firing questions at the person on the phone, and they hadn't been doing this for that long, so there's a lot of questions they hadn't asked. And the first question I asked is, this apartment that they're in, is it a good apartment for them? Meaning, is it even worth fighting to keep them here? Or would you be fighting to keep them in what is fundamentally an unhealthy or unsustainable situation? And they didn't know, so they hung up and went back to have some conversation, and they came back and said, yeah, this apartment, as lousy as it is, this is a good fit for them. This is worth fighting for. I said, okay, good. Do they have a legal rental contract? The answer is yes. Well, that means they're in a much stronger position than they realize. Whose name is the utility bill in? They go back and ask, oh, the utility bill's in the landlord's name, which means the landlord doesn't want to kick them out. Because if he kicks them out, he is legally responsible to pay it all. I asked, well, how long have they been living there? For a year. When they moved in, was there anything on the utility bill? Yeah, half the bill, about $550 worth, was already there. Which means legally, it's all the landlord's responsibility, and morally, it's at least half his, because half of it was already there before this poor family even moved in. Okay, how much is their rent? Their rent is about $200 a month. So this bill was a little over 5 months' rent. And then I asked this question, and this one's harder. If the family scraped, if they tried, could they come up with any extra money above their rent? And that's a hard question. It's a judgment call, because if you have someone in a desperate situation, you can't just ask them, hey, how much extra money can you come up with? Because what they feel is nothing. But you still have to figure it out. And so they kind of talked it through, and they came back and they said, yeah, you know what? We think they could come up with an extra $50 in a way that is doable and viable and wouldn't be kind of devastating to the family. So, having learned all those things, what did we do? Well, first, I said, just go back and just encourage them. Try to build them up. That all of the most serious aspects of poverty, not all, that's not true, many of the most serious aspects of poverty are rooted in being denied a full understanding and experience of what it means to be human, real agents. And they need to know that they're real people. They need to know that you believe in them. They need to know that there's hope. They need to hear somebody saying that, where they would actually receive it as affirmation. Now, myself, I believe God's real, and I believe he has a particular passion and concern for the poor and oppressed of the world. And so I don't believe there's any situation that is beyond hope. And we have seen remarkable things in all kinds of incredibly difficult situations. And then next, thinking back, I said, okay, now go, you need to embolden them with some truth. That there are situations not as bad as they think. That they have more power than they think they do. That the landlord can't just do whatever he wants. They have some power too. Help them see that if the landlord kicks them out, that he's stuck with the bill. Help them see that the landlord needs them. That they have something to offer. And that the landlord knows it. The landlord may be oppressive, but he's unlikely just stupid. And then I suggested this approach. Because often those who are trapped in poverty, just like if you're having a day where you're overwhelmed by anxiety, you're not thinking very well. So they often need help to see potential paths forward. But they have to own the paths. They have to think, yeah, that's good. I could do that. So this was the idea. I said, okay, tell them to go to the landlord and tell the landlord what everybody knows, which is half the bill, $550 worth, was already there when they moved in, and it's not their responsibility at all. And that if they leave, you'll get stuck with all of it. But they are great tenants, and they want to be helpful, and they want to do their part. They have a plan. Okay, so the total bill, right, $1,100. Their rent is $200. We determined they could come up with an extra $50 a month, right? So I said, okay, this is the plan. This is what they offered their landlord. They say, landlord, next month, we're not going to pay rent. We get to live rent-free next month. But instead, we will pay $500 towards this electric bill. Because we had told them that if they can come up with an extra $50, instead of $200 for rent, get $250, we'll match it. And then the month after that, landlord, we're not going to pay rent again, but we'll pay another $500 off the bill. And again, same thing, they scraped and came up with an extra $50, and we matched it. And then in the third month, they'll pay half their rent, just $100, and they'll use the other $100 to pay off the rest of the bill. The landlord agreed, and that's exactly what happened. So think through all those different realms of poverty and what happens when the situation's addressed in that way. Well, the electric bill gets paid. So you took care of the lack of money stuff to pay for electricity stuff. We've given $500 ourselves by matching $250 twice. The landlord gave up $500 in rent, and the refugees came up with an extra $100 on their own by scraping. They've experienced that their situation is not helpless. They've actively done things to solve the problem. They talked to their landlord, and even each of those first 2 months, the $250 that we gave them, experientially for them, what caused that? They worked, they saved, they scraped, and they came up with an extra $50. And because they came up with that extra $50, it triggered the help of $250, which means from their experience, they were the active agent in causing the solution to happen. Yeah, they needed help. They were in an awful situation. But the help came in a way that was working alongside them as they were working for a solution. They didn't simply experience the compassion of a rich person. They stood alongside what to them felt like a rich person. They did their part, and they sought a path forward together. They prayed together. Later, they rejoiced together. The refugee and the one seeking to serve them stood side by side, working together to solve the problem. And the landlord did not succeed in exploiting the family. He gave up himself $500 of rent. They stood up to him, they talked to him, they came to a solution that was good for both sides, meaning they interacted to that extent as peers. And so the landlord is now less likely to exploit them again in the future. They are less likely to be easily exploited in general. So in all those different aspects of poverty we talked about, they took steps out of them, not deeper into them. Okay, I've been talking nonstop for a while, so let me pause. Did that, I don't know if that helps someone. This is an enormous topic.
What I was a little bit interested in is how did you get her family to change? In other words, if they were part of the Taliban, if they believe Sharia law, or how are you able to help women that are so subject to this intolerance?
So her family, like quite conservative, was not in the Taliban. They're from a different tribe, and her family didn't change. But on the day that she left, we needed to be physically present. And then for a while, she had to be living farther away in an unknown place. And until her life situation was such that it was not shameful for the family. And then there needed to be enough passage of time and engagement with them that they basically backed down. But part of that was because there was, I don't know what the right word is, they realized it was clear to them that there were people standing with her who did have access to power and authorities and legal structures, right? Like, I can hire a lawyer to force the police to go after them.
Armando, this is brilliant, and thank you so much. As you were talking, I couldn't help but think about sort of the micro case that you described here and how it might be applicable to macro cases. Governments carrying out poverty alleviation programs within their own countries, or aid that we give, developmental aid to other countries, and whether we might learn something from these micro approaches. Have you thought about that? And have you?
Only in random conversations with people who operate in those realms. And so I do think there are some foundational principles. One is the thing I talked about, is understanding the breadth of different kinds of poverty involved. Another one is the issue of ownership. Another one is depth of relational commitment. You can't help when someone's in real need, you can't help them just by stopping by a program or sending them a gift or something like that. That doesn't address these kinds of situations. And so yeah, there are all kinds of underlying principles. And the biggest, we're probably not going to get to it, but the biggest blind spot I think we have as Westerners is even a different thing we haven't gotten to yet, but it's a little hard to explain. So we'll see if we get there.
Yeah. Just take a minute and explain your surroundings. Are you in a city?
Yeah, we're in a big city.
A big city.
Yes, and so, but with no refugee camps, so folks from all over Central Asia, Africa, the Middle East are just interspersed throughout the city.
And how do they know you and you know them? How does that?
So it's there's all kinds of different programs that, you know, for different communities, you know, language classes, moms and tots programs for different groups, tea houses. And so some of it's that, just people coming to larger programs and then following up outside of that context. But a lot of it is just getting into relational networks. And so, you know, then, I mean, so I know my dad, and now to some extent, I know y'all, you know, kind of. I mean, and even in the sense of, and so if someone is sitting there saying, oh, maybe he could help me, well, now, because I was here, there's a whole lot of people who could potentially reach out. And when you're dealing with people in great need where there's very scarce resources, we don't have to find them, they find us. And because the folks that we work with, we're much more focused, so we do almost no relief. Almost everything we do is development, meaning seeking to change long-term life trajectories. As opposed to meeting a crisis situation, which is also, I mean, like right now, Maui needs relief, right? But that involves deeper relational engagement, and so you've got a certain capacity. So right now, if everybody and all the different volunteers and sort of the different programs that informally are networked together, if they're all firing on all cylinders, we're probably having a significant impact on about 700 lives at a time, either families or individuals. And there's always more opportunity for engagement than we have capacity for. So our limit is always our capacity, not how do we find people.
Thank you for your stories. I've always had the expression life is mysterious and magical. It's also complex, and I think there are many roads that lead to goodness, and I appreciate that you have chose your own path. My question is this. You finished your studies in Deerfield. Why did you point your car toward the MENA region instead of the south side of Chicago? Your definition of poverty is equally, in my opinion, applicable to that community.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, for us personally, it was that, I mean, the simplest answer is that it's what we thought we were supposed to do. But I think maybe the more critical question is not just an individual perspective, why is one person here versus there, but the number of resources, so the needs are enormous all over the place, but the number of resources available in Chicago are massively different than the number of resources available in our part of the world, both in terms of manpower, training. I mean, we operate in a place where there are no state resources at all, and so it's I would say qualitatively in terms of resource and accessibility, substantially different.
Thank you very much. You talked about the individual transformation, and this kind of ties a little bit to what Kaiser was saying, you know, micro versus macro. As a woman who is being oppressed and victimized by her family, what do you do to facilitate or understand or further learning and insights of the family, as well as a landlord who might be exacting this same toll on other individuals? Because when you step back and go micro, macro, root cause, are you looking at the root cause of a lot of these things, and how might you be getting involved? And I realize this is very complex.
Yeah.
But any insight?
So we are in a context where we have no access to root causes, and if we sought to engage with them, we would get kicked out. So in terms of on a broad societal level, laws, institutions, those kinds of things. So we're not in a position as foreigners to engage in that realm where we are. But in the lives of individual people, there are still root cause kinds of issues. And then you get the question of, are they addressable or not? And you have to make a decision. So if you take, domestic violence and abuse of women, right? So that's something we're talking about, and you just asked about that. Well, in some of the situations, you can engage at the source in terms of the people in the community or the family members that abuse is coming from. And you can see change happen there that changes the context in which someone is living. So we see that happen sometimes. But in many situations, that feels entirely untenable. So for example, if one of the challenges for refugee women who are working is that it is quite common for their employers to only be willing to pay them if they're allowed to rape them. And that's not something we can address. Like we don't have access to, and so in a situation like that, what that woman needs is a job in a context where she can get paid without giving permission to be raped. And there's other contexts where, no, we've actually able to see some kinds of change. And we've had some contexts where even in that, where there's local relationships, and whether it's just through individuals or through lawyers, where you actually are putting some pressure on people. But you have to make the decision of, can we help with the source issue here? Or is that untouchable given our resource and our access? And then what's the solution for this person or this family? And those are often painful, heartbreaking decisions. But in some ways it's saying you have to deal with reality. And we're a small little group, and so we can kind of do what we can do.
So, Amanda, you deal with in Muslim countries, and your background is Christian. Do you have any? We're talking poverty, but do you bring any Christian values into this? Do you have any?
Yeah. So our ministries are all Christian ministries.
How do you reconcile that? Because we know missionaries in the Arab world they have a difficult time.
Yeah. When you say reconcile it, what do you mean?
Well, some of your Princeton colleagues, they have a Christian mission college in Cairo, and their parents are missionaries in Jordan.
Yeah, I think I know them. In fact, I was just emailing with the husband last week.
Really?
Because our sons are applying to similar colleges they just went through the process. Yeah.
So, any issues there?
No, we're very fortunate in that regard, and in part it's because we work with refugees, and so we're not working with the local population, and that just means we have more. I think we matter less to the powers that be, but also we have sought to structure everything we do incredibly carefully, so that it's all good. Right, so we'll have times where the police will show up somewhere, and if they show up, we say, hey, come on in, have a cup of tea, look around, here's these ladies are having discussion groups, the kids over here doing some crafts, we'd offer you to join in, but you're not a Syrian woman with a young child, so this program's not for you, and so we just, the biggest thing is that we've really sought to structure things well in ways that are intelligible in our context. We've been incredibly fortunate so far in being able to do that. So we have many people who serve in any kind of way in the Middle East, I think, run into more issues than we have. We've been very fortunate.
Question. You're dealing with refugees, which is not, they're all incredibly resilient survivors. I mean, like you were talking about, the people you interact with, they may be abjectly poor and horribly traumatized and the rest of it, but they had enough wherewithal to get out of their situation and land in Istanbul, right? So it's a very self-possessed, powerful group of people that gives you a better chance.
So I don't have enough experience with, say, working with the poor in all kinds of contexts to say, I will say people are remarkably resilient. In some cases, there is a certain kind of, for many refugees, the only reason they got out is that they were courageous. Though a lot of it is happening as clans. And so it could have been, this one, in effect, the kind of clan leader, like maybe it's, 15 families, made a decision, the whole clan's going. And that doesn't mean that everybody in the clan is in that position, and years drag on. And then there's some folks where, now you just really didn't have an option. If your village is burning down, you have nowhere to sleep. Or if you stay somewhere, you're gonna be killed. The vast majority of people will move. So it really depends on the circumstances of what brought them there. But yes, I will certainly affirm that there is remarkable resiliency in people. Yeah.
Time for one more.
Okay. You want to pick the last one so people can be mad at you, not me? Okay, I feel like
During your years in Turkey, have you seen any work that Rotary has been doing there?
No. But I'm not a good networker. we're so focused on what we're doing. So we now know a lot of people, but it's because they've seen what's happening. They're like, oh, we want to help out or come alongside or learn from that. But in terms of just knowing, like my dad's a networker. He knows people all over the place. That's not a gifting of mine.
Like National Immunization Days for polio, we've not seen that.
No, but I'm not a networker. I'm kind of head down, do what we're doing, and then as people come alongside, I'll engage, to help out. But
Everybody have a great weekend. For you football aficionados, don't forget Sam Howell makes his debut as starting quarterback for the Washington Commanders tonight.